Good evening, everyone. This is Steve Ward with Docked Out. Thanks so much for joining. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Just search for Docked Out Official, all as one word. You can also visit our website, dockedout.org, or feel free to email me, steve at dockedout.org, and I'd be happy to write you back. I've been talking quite a bit about LGBTQ ideology over the past couple of months, and I wanted to continue that on today, but with a little bit of a different flair, talking about the detransition movement. So, this is really huge. It's getting off the ground, being a lot more recognized, and many more people are speaking out who are going through a detransition, returning back to their biological sex after having gone through a transition process of some kind. So I think this is a super important conversation. Previously, I've talked about transgender ideology, where this comes from in postmodernism and progressive type of thinking, taking a look at the intersex conditions and also some of the medical studies that are often used to support transgender ideology, taking a look at flaws in methodology and conclusions that are really not statistically valid based on the limitations of the design and just the structure, statistically speaking, of a given study. So take a look at those if you're able to, and I hope that you find it helpful. But tonight, I want to hear from somebody who is going through transition right now. So there's a young woman. She goes by Casey. She's 21 years old. She started a transition process from female to male when she was 17. So she's now 21 and starting to go through a detransition process. And I want you to hear what she has to say. And honestly, it's very insightful, very thought provoking. And I think this is going to be a really huge challenge to the church, to Christians, to really listen and enter into the world of somebody who has been through a process such as this and is now changing their mind. We really have got to hear this. And I hope it really helps us just learn how to better minister to people who are going through something like this. She's going to make comments that you may agree or disagree with, and that's okay. But I want you to just listen and put in the back of your mind, if somebody like Casey came into the church, or if I came across somebody similar, how would I respond? What would I say? So that's really the goal, to learn how to better minister to people as the church. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from tonight. Before we jump into some of those videos, I do want to suggest going to a website, sexchangeregret.com. Sexchangeregret.com. This is a website that really has a lot of great resources. People who are going through a detransition or who later in life come to regret their decision to transition. Very open and honest discussions with a lot of great resources. I think it's worth a check. So go there, and I think you'll be glad that you did so. So transgender activists will say that, very few people will want to detransition, maybe 1% or even less. And they'll say that most people who detransition are only the ones who go through a social transition process first, and that the rates would be higher for them. But let's just stop and think for a second. So, to give puberty blockers to an adolescent, which are not reversible, and then followed by hormone therapy and ultimately surgery, it makes sense that individuals who are going through such a medical process like that are less likely to detransition in the middle of that process for a lot of reasons that we're going to get into tonight. We've touched upon some of it, but I think what we're doing now is trying to better understand what's happening in these individual lives and identifying flaws in the assumptions that are being made within the ideology itself. So they might recommend, for example, you can ask questions like, Do you regret having been on hormones? Would you do this all over again? But those questions have a lot of limitations. To do surveys such as that cannot demonstrate cause, because you're only capturing somebody at one particular moment in time. You don't know when they started to transition or when they decided to detransition and so forth. Maybe they're happy at the moment, but followed out, we know that suicide rates are 19, 20 times the general population at 10 years after transition. So there's just a lot of limitations to this type of claim that the detransition rate is very, very low. So always be skeptical. And if you have the opportunity to read some of these studies for yourself, definitely do so. So conversion therapy too. I want to try to help explain what this actually is. So the terminology is not talking about a spiritual conversion. So the term conversion therapy is talking about like a counseling session where somebody tries to talk somebody out of being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. But I want to point out that this is really not the mental health care that I'm talking about to help people with underlying mental health problems. Conversion therapy, as it's being used in the culture, is sitting down and just trying to have an argument and try to say, you're wrong, you shouldn't be doing this, and try to change somebody's mind. That's not real therapy. So that's not what we're talking about. So just keep that in mind. So with that, I want to go ahead and run some videos for you. They're pretty brief, a minute or so a piece, and then I'll give a reaction and we'll talk a little bit about what Casey says. So let's get started with that. So let's hear from Casey, and we'll take it from there. Let's roll the first video.
Ooh. Okay. So hi. First video, I guess, but it's kind of just me talking in my car, because this is the only place I really have to film right now. So I thought I would just do it on here and say that I've made the decision to attempt to detransition. I have no idea how it's going to pan out. I have no idea what that's going to look like, but I'm going to try. And for the longest time, I've been holding myself back from trying because I thought I was too far gone, as the infamous video said. But comments from people have kind of made me think otherwise. It didn't help that there were people thinking I was a biological man and that this was all a ruse. It's interesting, that was like the TRA perspective, and then there were people on like the gender critical side that were like, no, we can still tell, and you could still pass as a woman, you still look like a woman. And at first it was offensive, but then I was like, hold on, if a bunch of people are saying this, and I was talking to people in DMs about this, then does that mean other people have been able to tell? And how many people have I interacted with that I've been able to tell this entire time, and people are just being nice? And that kind of shifted my viewpoint of, well, have people been lying to me about my ability to pass? And that, I don't know, that really tripped me up. And the thing that really was the nail in the coffin was there were like 2 or 3 other YouTubers that I was watching while I was transitioning that, you know, of course, like searching detransition, FTMTF, YouTube and stuff, they're now detransitioning. That was kind of like, okay, there's a lot more people doing this, and there's stuff that I never got to do, and experiences I never got to have that, if I didn't detransition and allow myself to try, I would never know. And I think for me, in the field I want to go into, psychological space, social work, still undecided about that. In order for me to help people, I can't be lying to myself. And continuing to do this is lying to myself. I don't know what my ability to pass looks like, but I'm not worried about that right now. I'm just worried about being me again, not hiding anymore.
Okay, so Casey says a lot. I like Casey. I think she's very honest, very likable. I really admire the desire that she has to try this detransition process. And notice that she said that to continue um, transitioning as and living as a man is lying to herself, okay, in her own words. And she also does not want others lying to her. And I think that really speaks to the sense that we all have. We all want to be told the truth. We all want to live the truth. And that really comes out. But I think, she says that she is going to attempt. She's not sure how this is going to go. So there's this sense of uncertainty, a sense of unknown, and some fear even. And I want to try to hone in on a phrase that she said. She says that she felt like she was, quote, too far gone. Okay, now that is so key because what we're finding is that young people who are going through a transition really do think that they've gone too far, they're too far gone, and that they actually can't reverse course. So this is very revealing. And now the challenge I think that Casey has is that she's still using social media to evaluate whether or not she's passing as a man or is appearing as a woman to others. So in other words, she's still in this mode or in this mentality of receiving her identity from the opinion of other people on the outside rather than understanding more firmly in a deep foundation, more spiritual sense who she is, made in the image of God, made with a purpose and made with love. Still is very much struggling with that issue, going back to social media. And she even says she needs to see, other people that she admired, people who are transitioning. She noticed that they were starting to change their minds and then detransition, and that encouraged her to do the same. So I want you to notice that her social world, at least as far as we know, and I don't know that this is true, but she seems to be alone, very isolated. She's not talking about family, friends, people that she's getting together with, talking, that are embracing her and helping her. She's going to social media to evaluate what other people might think of her and how other people might feel about her, and getting her encouragement or discouragement from social media. And I think that's very characteristic of the younger generation today. So that came through, I think, pretty clearly to me. She also says that the ideology, or let me back up for a second. So the transgender ideology likes to put forth in the culture that, if you are transgender, you're going to be bullied and be discriminated against. But actually, she says that people were very nice, that people could tell, and they were very nice. And she actually resented that because she felt like that they were lying to her. So this also, I think, goes against and speaks against the wider cultural messaging that it is really just not true, that we have such an intolerant society. We're actually very tolerant, but to the point where this is backfiring, because we're, by being tolerant, we're actually being very dishonest, and that's hurtful in the process. What was very hopeful about her comments was that she's starting to break free from, I think, from the opinions of other people. And she does admit that this transition process was really a way of hiding for her, which speaks to, well, what was she really hiding from? And she's going to get into that in more detail here in a moment. She's going to talk a little bit more about what she is hiding from. Let's roll the next video.
And being urged by the gender clinic that I go to. Well, it's an LGBT health clinic, but it's where I get my hormones. That in the next 1 to 2 years, if I keep taking testosterone, I'm going to have to get a hysterectomy because of risk of cancer, which now my conspiracy theory brain is thinking Well, is that because they want me dependent on testosterone? Is that so they don't want me to go back? Um, I don't know. My last shot was Friday, 100 milligrams, and I was debating on like just tempering, or not tempering, tapering down. But I'm on some of the Discord forums. I'm not on Reddit because that place is a cesspool. No one knows it's me on there. And I've asked about it, and they've said, frankly, it's going to be a struggle bus. Either way, whether you taper on or off, and you're just prolonging the process by tapering down. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. So I'm just going to stop and see how I feel.
Okay, so it breaks my heart to hear. So she's being told by her doctors that if she continues on testosterone, she's going to get cancer, basically. Uterine cancer is a complication of testosterone therapy. So part of the gender affirming care is to have a hysterectomy. Okay, she's 21 years old, will never have kids. So, it's really just tragic. And she's correct to question the medical system. She's very skeptical. We've talked a little bit about, there are financial biases and motives, people who are wanting to advance their career, who really are genuine, they're sincere, they think that they're doing the right thing. There's also an element of virtue signaling, I think, within healthcare, where we're so focused on trying to be compassionate and to meet people where they're at, and to help people through difficult feelings, to care for people in the way that they feel or the way that they want to be cared for. But actually, this can be a way that the healthcare providers themselves are trying to feel good about themselves. Okay, so there's this concept of what's really the motivation going on there, which I thought was very astute of her. Um, and again, she mentions this fear of having a struggle, the unknown. Can I do this? And I think that fear does deter some people who want to detransition from doing so. And what I really got out of this was, the sense that Casey is still seemingly, alone in this process. And for the church, we can take this as a challenge. Here is somebody who is hurting, who's hearing a lot of different things, getting bad advice, is scared about the future. And where are we? Where are the Christians who can really come alongside and seek her out and love her, and not in a shameful way, not in any type of a judgmental way, surround her with love? That's what she needs from the church, right? And let's hear more about some of that. We'll get a little bit more into it. So I'm going to post another video here. Let's hear a little bit more from what she has to say.
I mean, like, the hair loss, it bothers me. It doesn't bother me as much if I'm thinking about being a man, but it bothers me because I don't feel like a man, and I'm not sure I've ever really felt like a man. I don't identify with that word. I know I'm using that terminology, but I don't feel that. I've always felt like I'm masquerading. And it's especially hard because I do miss having long hair. I do miss having thicker hair. I had really thick hair. I was always known as a kid for my hair. And it's gone.
It's hard to hear. So there are permanent changes to testosterone for her. So there's male pattern baldness, actually, you can get receding hairline, facial hair, the deepening voice. Those are permanent. And then her loss of her long hair was really difficult for her, and you can hear that in her voice. So the loss is real for her. And notice, I thought it was so key. She admitted to masquerading, this kind of pretend game, trying to be a man, that she never actually felt like a man. But remember, in the criteria that the medical establishment will use is is all about gender dysphoria, right? So you know she's admitting here that she never really felt like she was a man, but she was ushered through this process of transition anyway, which raises a whole nother host of bioethical questions. So I think that the challenge is, how do we really see people? And when we come across somebody like Casey in our lives, what we see is her externals, right? Um, but that doesn't really reflect who she is as a human being, and you have no idea what she's gone through and what she's currently going through. All you see is somebody who is gender non-conforming, if you want to use that phrase, and that causes us to have a lot of emotional reactions about her, about maybe what her thoughts are about different political issues or social issues. So we kind of go in that direction rather than, whoa, wait a minute, here's somebody who really needs compassion. And if Christians aren't going to be the ones to be compassionate and show the love of Christ, then who will? So we have to get beyond just seeing and evaluating people based on just what we see of them, and again just enter into deeper, much deeper relationships, and not to be judgmental. That's the term we hate. People say, well, Christians are so judgmental. Well, it can be true in a lot of cases. But to be judgmental in the way that the Bible means it is not talking about looking down on others. It's talking about being discerning between right and wrong, like exercising judgment, exercising discernment. It has nothing to do with looking down on other people as if we're somehow superior. And I think we just have to be really careful how we come across to others, because that's the perception that's in society about Christians, and that's what's going to stick. So we have to work extra hard to overcome that. Let's hear a little bit more.
But at the end of the day, I can't help people if I'm lying to myself, and I can only disassociate for so long. I don't know if this is the real me or if this is a chemical byproduct. I am a byproduct of a drug I'm taking, because I know that to be the case with Effexor, but I can't just come off of Effexor. Maybe I could come off of Effexor if I come off the testosterone. I don't know. And I owe it to myself to try, instead of telling myself I'm too far gone, because I'm 21. I'm not too far gone, and frankly, I'm not sure I could live with myself if I didn't try.
What I hear there is somebody who, she values herself enough that she knows she has to try, and that's awesome. That is a great thing. I also heard the word disassociate. Um, that's often the result of trauma. So people who have been through trauma of various kinds will often disassociate. So that's like a mental coping mechanism where we repress memories, we disassociate or detach ourselves from the world in a variety of ways. And she just admitted, I can't do that anymore, which speaks to the fact that her gender dysphoria and her transition was a symptom of underlying mental health problems that she had in her life beforehand. So I thought that was very telling. And she said, is this the real me? I don't know if this is the real me, a chemical byproduct. So I think people who are struggling with gender dysphoria and transgenderism, I think are really having a true identity crisis. Really, that's really what this is. People who are receiving their identity from the outside sources of how people perceive them, rather than understanding who they are. We're accepted and loved by God, not for what we do, for how we look, how we, whatever we do. It's for who we are as human beings made in His image. And I think that's the key that we need to keep in mind. Let's hear more.
as much as I like to stand by myself. And, I think I don't need the support, and, I don't need the recognition. I don't need anything from anybody. I can be independent and do this on my own. I can't. And I haven't reached this conclusion by myself. And I don't think I'm going to make it to the end by myself. So that's that.
A couple of key moments there. I'm not going to make it by myself. So true. This is a real, cry out for help. So Casey is very articulate, um, and I think she's being very transparent and very emotional. And I think she really means that she can't do this alone. She's not going to make it alone. And I think the fact that she said that tells me that, where's family and friends? She doesn't have a network that is surrounding her. So social media contacts don't count. I think that's really essential. So the church, I think we need to enter deep relationships with people who are suffering. And we know that, right? But do we really do it and invest ourselves in a way that really matters, where, do people know that we're there for them? If they're struggling and if they don't know if they're going to make it, who are they going to call or reach out to? Or do they go to social media? I think that is the challenge. And remembering that if our response is one of, shaming someone else, where you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't have done that, this is wrong. Um, we drive people away in a sense. Notice that's not what she needs right now. She needs people to love her, to tell her the truth, to walk with her, to laugh and cry with her, to hold her hand through this. And it doesn't appear that she has that. Um, let's take a look at Casey 7 months after she made that initial video, that initial series of video clips that I showed you. This is her now 7 months later.
Hi. Last time I filmed a video in my car like this, I came on and talked about how I felt like I was too far gone. I didn't say that my life was over, but I thought that because of medical transition, that I had sentenced myself to living life as a pseudo-mediocre man, and that was just the fate that I had, talking about the long-term effects of testosterone. Now, an update since then. At the time, in early October, I was still on testosterone, and in late October, I decided to stop cold turkey. And so it's been a little over 7 months since then. And I've noticed some changes. I've noticed behavioral changes in terms of how I process things, how I process emotions, crying, all of that stuff. Just kind of stereotypical, but it's true. Testosterone does have an impact on my brain and how I process things. Physical changes as well, body fat redistribution, hormone levels, and all that stuff. But largely speaking, most of the changes are permanent, and that's fine. I've come to a point of acceptance with the current circumstances. My voice is this way. It's going to stay this way. My hairline, obviously I'm growing my hair out. I kept buzzing it until about January-ish. And then I was like, okay, we're going to try and grow it out and see what happens. And I'm trying some naturopathic stuff. But, my hairline is still receded. It's not coming back. Hopefully it's better, especially as it grows longer. But a lot of the changes are permanent. And also, I had a double mastectomy. And I'm obviously, my breasts are not going to grow back. That's just not going to happen. I had laser on my face, but, I still have permanent body hair growth. I still have permanent hair loss, permanent voice deepening, permanent changes everywhere. And I thought that it was a death sentence for me. And I didn't want to be here after I figured out what I did to myself and what the medical establishment allowed me to do. And I struggled for months. I really did. So why am I logging on now on a new account where I didn't want to bring too much attention to myself? People have found it helpful when I speak. I don't know why. I guess they just like what I have to say, or maybe my perspective. But I think the biggest thing that I want to say is that based on where I was at previously versus where I'm at now, when I filmed that video, I thought there was no hope for me. And now, several months later, I don't know what happened sometime in late April. I think a switch flipped for me because I cried for months. I was grieving for months. I was mad. I was angry. I didn't want to be here. And I kept trying to hang on because I knew it wasn't an option to kill myself. I mean, it is an option, but it wasn't realistically an option. I have a purpose. I just don't know what it is yet, and I know I don't want to live, but I have to keep going. But something flipped in late April for me, and I don't know what it was. And now I do want to keep going, and I'm coping with the changes, and I'm coping with, being perceived ambiguously in society because I'm a conglomeration of secondary sex characteristics, some of which are natural and some of which are artificially induced. But I'm coping. Is it easy? No, it's not. But I'm able to move forward, and I am moving forward, and I've accepted that this is just the reality of things. But it also doesn't have to sentence me to a certain way of living forever. I can still do something great with my life, and I can still move on. And I don't have to let these changes dictate how I live my life forever. And I think I'm beginning to heal, which is not something that I thought even a couple months ago I could say. So I guess what I'm trying to say is mainly for people who think that they are trans, or that they regret things, or that they're too far gone and they just can't go back. You're never too far gone to return to who you are. And that might look different for anybody. But it's not bad to question things. It's not bad to look at why you decided to transition in the first place. And it's never too late to take a step back from things. And don't let anybody dictate that timeline for you. You've got to do it on your own time. But I guess the whole point of this is that I want to tell anybody that is in the throes of regret, in the throes of grief, is questioning where they're at with things, that it does get better. I don't think this should have happened. I don't want this to keep happening to other kids and vulnerable young adults such as myself. But my life is not over because of it. And I think we're a lot more resilient than we realize. So, yeah, that's my update. I'm here. And I stopped talking for a bit, but I think I'm going to start talking again and see where it goes. And I hope that this helps somebody, at the very least. That, we can grow, we can move on from this. So, that's it. Thank you for listening.
A lot going on emotionally there. So she thought she had what she describes as a life sentence, thought it was a death sentence. You hear some suicidality in there, loss of hope. What stood out to me was the grieving for months that she described, and she didn't know her life's purpose. And so I think common in the younger generation, especially as we've removed God from society, we're so secularized, and the churches have not necessarily taught our identity in Christ well and helped young people to understand that they have a purpose, and their purpose, just in a broad sense, is to know who God is, who made you, who loves you, to know God and to make him known to others. This whole generation is really missing out on that type of mentality. But I felt very hopeful for her that she's doing generally well. She's on the road to healing, in her words, but very raw emotion. And I think the challenge for the church is to capture people like Casey and help them while there is an opportunity. It seems to me like Casey went through this 7th-month period grieving and going through all of these emotional issues. It was a roller coaster for her. That time period is when it would have been ideal for Christians to come by and just love her where she is and to walk with her through that process. But she didn't have that, at least as far as we are aware. And I think it's just a challenge that stands out to me is like she's trying to help other people. Um, she's trying to reach people like her, but shouldn't we be the ones who are reaching them? So I have some more videos that I'd like to share. I'm going to pull those up here. And in these ones that I'm going to start running, she's going to continue. This is several months later now from that most recent video, and she's going to make some comments that I think we really need to take as a further challenge in how we interact with people such as Casey. The language, the words that we use, the impact that it has, it's very powerful. So let's run these.
It's not just something you can blame on like this, like, you know, the gender cult or gender ideology. I still think that there are pervasive forces outside of gender, outside of LGBT, that are contributing to people seeking out transition. Now, this is another thing that I don't like people tell me and other people like me, is that, you know, it wasn't your fault, and, you know, they did this to you. This was done to you. And while I understand that, that mitigates the fact that the desire to transition was there and the desire to escape was there. I want to make this very clear. There were two main reasons why I transitioned, and it was because of child sexual abuse that made me not want to be female, and homophobia.
Notice she didn't say because she thought she was a different gender from childhood. So childhood sexual abuse and homophobia. Um, I think Casey is correct to say that, you know, blaming society is not effective. She says that gender dysphoria is a escape, and in her case, she talks about her history of abuse and undergoing homophobia. So she goes on to say a little bit more about the homophobia. So basically, she was growing up, going through adolescence, puberty, and whatnot, and she was identifying as lesbian, and because of homophobia that she was perceiving towards her. She felt like she was not measuring up, not a good enough woman because of identifying as lesbian. And it was because of that homophobia, it led her to further hate herself as a woman, which further motivated her to transition to be a man. So, you know, a lot going on there. So, I think it's incorrect to say that, you know, evangelicals should, you know, approve of LGBTQ because we don't want to be homophobic. Um, so we don't want to be homophobic, but you have to define what you mean by that. So not homophobic in the sense that people look down on, shame, hate, discriminate against, bully. You know, of course not. So no, we're not homophobic. We meet people with where they're at and we love them along the process without shaming them for being where they're at. We all have our own life history, our own struggles, and we all deal with our own issues, right? So, you know, we all you know, have a story, have a life story that got us to be where we are right now. So she's correct to say that the evangelical community um, could have handled that much better. But I disagree with the fact that we should approve of the alternative lifestyle, you know, a healthy, you know, way to live. So there are lines there that I think get a little bit blurred for Casey, but I think her overall message, I think she's on track and has an important point. So to love and to accept where people are at is different than approving and affirming is, I think, really the point there that she's trying to make. And I agree with that. Let's roll the next video.
In order for something like this, in order for medicalizing children, at this point, children and vulnerable young adults, in order for us to reach this point, a society has to be awfully sick. And I don't think it's just, you know, the liberals that have taken control of everything and those evil liberals. No, I think that conservatism and evangelical Christianity and homophobia and the desire to fix and medicalize the weirdos of society has contributed and laid the groundwork for medicalization and medical transition to become a thing. And I think we need to shift the narrative to looking at how we got here as a society as a whole, not how gender ideology evolved over time and the gender zeitgeist happened, right? Because I think that certainly is a thing, maybe in later years, but it's not the case for everybody. And certainly I think that, more societal factors got us there.
Yeah, totally. I think she's right that society has to be awfully sick. Spiritually sick, I think, is the key, and that she's trying to articulate, but just doesn't quite, understand that context of it. But absolutely, the society and the culture that allows um, uh, gender affirming care and transgenderism to thrive, I think, is very complicated, but certainly it's really spiritually sick. She's angry. I think that stood out to me here. She's frustrated with evangelical Christians for trying to fix the weirdos, as she says. And I think this gets back to sometimes our desire to fix others, right? Um, we do want to see her come to Christ and to understand her identity in Christ. We want those things, but I think it's all in the approach. So honestly, think about this for a minute. If Casey came into your church, or if she was a neighbor and had this conversation, she just told those things to you out on the front lawn, what would you say? How would you respond? I think she's correct to say that we often come across as, you know, we want to help you, we want to fix you because there's something going on that we don't like or don't agree with that is wrong. But she's calling for acknowledgement of what's happening in the background and the bigger picture. And I think that's true. And we can still have a burden for Casey and people like her, but it's all in how we interact and how we love and communicate. I think a great thing to do is, if we were having a conversation with her, would be to just listen and to speak very, very little, but just listen and acknowledge what she's been through, and acknowledge and hear her point of view. We don't have to agree with all of it. That's totally fine. But I think it starts with listening, 100 times more than we actually talk. And then you can come alongside and give people nuggets of truth along the way and help them, but never in the sense that, saying things like, you are bad, you are wrong, to have a conviction of sin, to feel guilt of sin, that anyone may have in their life, that I might have in my life. To feel guilty is different than shame. Guilt is not the same as shame. A guilt is something like, this was wrong. I did something that wasn't right, as opposed to shame, which means I am bad. I am not right. I am bad. So there's this internalization that occurs with shame. When we give people a shaming message, they feel something is wrong with me. I am bad, not just that I made a mistake or I've suffered and struggled in some area. That's the difference, but it is a huge, huge difference in what people hear coming from us. One comment about this whole idea of following our feelings is really very prominent, I think, in transgender ideology. And so where does that come from? So I think, to speak to Casey's point about society, I think we've gotten to the point where we've redefined love as follow your feelings. Your feelings are not just more important than the truth. Your feelings are the truth. They're your truth. Just live your truth according to your feelings. And if you loved me, you would want me to live my truth according to my feelings. And, I think part of this we saw in the same-sex marriage issue, and just in marital relationships in general, where we look for a partner, we look for a spouse who we think are going to complete us, who are going to make us happy. It's me focused, it's my feelings focused, right? Rather than this person that I may marry is a complement to me. And together, we're going to walk through our life together and follow the will of God for our lives. And I'm going to love this person sacrificially, and I'm going to give myself to this other person rather than think, what can I get from this person? So I think part of it is how the church, just broadly speaking, has kind of gone along with this idea that love really is more of a feeling more than a um, covenant relationship, so to speak. So, we've gotten a little bit drawn into that progressive type of mentality. And the next step is, well, then anybody can marry anybody as long as you feel a certain way. So there's this natural progression of focusing on feelings leading into same-sex marriage, which leads down the road to other things where you can just uh, do basically whatever you want as long as it feels like the right thing to you, even though our feelings are just completely unreliable. And that's why we need to have a firm foundation in the Word of God. So, well, what can the church do? What can we do? So, I think we have to teach again from scratch that love is sacrificial. Look what Christ did for us on the cross, and God sending His Son, and so forth. And when we do enter relationships that are loving, they are to reflect that, and they are to be sacrificial in nature. And we don't want to fall into the mentality that somebody else is going to complete us. God completes us. God makes us whole, and God heals, and we get our identity given to us from God. It's not something that we seek out in another person or in culture. Let's roll another video and hear some more.
You're not changing sex. You are pursuing these cosmetic interventions because of gender dysphoria, and you are choosing to and or have attempted to in certain capacities to try and rectify that dysphoria, and you're choosing to go this route of cosmetic change. And you have to know that it won't necessarily work. It could work, it could make your life easier, you could become more functional, but you are not changing sex, and you are just changing how other people perceive you in society. If that was what transition was, and we encourage people to work through it in therapy, and we didn't label everybody that wants to help people work through their issues and their trauma as conversion therapists, I would be a lot more okay with this. But that's not the current situation. And while we have gender affirming care is medically necessary, life-saving, supported by every major medical organization in the United States, so we have that one side that's very extreme. But then on the other side, we have, it's gender ideology, they're trying to sterilize and mutilate their children, and tear apart the traditional family unit, and it's the school's fault, and social media's fault, and it's the all trans women are groomers. That is also an extreme that I don't think is being beneficial to us and to society as a whole, nor do I think it is rectifying the issue. I am now to the point where I'm not even sure legislation is rectifying the issue.
Okay, so I really admire how Casey is very emotionally honest. And she comes out and says, you're not changing your sex, you're only changing how other people perceive you. And I also really like that she said that she would be okay with conversion therapy. And remember, conversion therapy, that's really talking about counseling to help people through their underlying mental health disorder that led them to gender dysphoria. Um, I think she didn't say this, but I think she, would have wanted to have that when she was younger and possibly not gone down this road to begin with. So I think that's really great, to hear somebody say that conversion therapy, or you better described as just, counseling resources as a good thing that is necessary. In fact, conversion therapy or counseling has been banned. It's illegal in several countries and many states now too within the US. So, which is, unfortunate, and we need to lobby against that. But that's really what people need. I think she's right that the language we use to talk about the government and politics, and activists, this kind of, all of those leftists, the way we can sometimes talk, I think that really is problematic because people who are in government and in politics are generally trying to do what they think is the right thing to do. Of course, we disagree, but I think it would be a lot more constructive to focus on how we can love people and help them as individuals, meeting people where they're at as the individual, rather than focusing on all of the ills of society. We already know that there's a spiritual darkness that is really descending quickly. It feels. In America and really across the world. So, we know these things are happening and are going to continue to happen. So really, I think the focus from a more evangelical standpoint is, how can I help each individual that God puts into my pathway to speak the truth in love? Um, I disagree with a little bit of, it seems like she wants to um, completely maybe not speak out against government or politicians or activists. Maybe that's the solution. She didn't exactly, say it in that way, but that was a little bit of the feeling that I got. And I don't agree. I think Christians should be involved in politics. We must be involved in politics. Um, but how we do so, again, I think is really the key. Remember that to be salt and light, that's what we're called to do. That requires that we're out there in the culture, visibly speaking out, making a difference, speaking truth. So, we have to stand up for what is right, regardless of the cost, but in such a way that people understand that we have their best interests in mind. In terms of legalization, I agree with her that we can't just pass a law and have and expect that's going to just solve all of society's problems. But I would say that all laws do. I want to say involve moral decisions, right? So murder is a moral choice, theft, um, you name it, these are all moral choices. So, all laws are designed really to curb or to restrict moral choices that are detrimental to the individual and detrimental to society. So, I don't think we should stop passing laws that are beneficial. But I agree that laws by themselves are not the answer. We need to address society's problems, which are really more in the spiritual realm. All right, let's roll one more video.
If you think that telling a kid, maybe if you tell them at 13 they can't go on puberty blockers, and you try and get them help in therapy, they might work through their gender dysphoria and they might not identify as trans once they reach 18. You tell a 16 17-year old that, and you limit their ability to do that. As soon as they turn 18, more often than not, depending on how the parents and the schools and the people around them approach that issue, they're going to run off and transition hard. And I'm saying this from experience, not my direct experience of having done that. I was 17 when the medicalization began. However, if I had been told that, no, this is wrong, you're crazy, you're mentally ill, which, well, I was told, but if I had been told all that and said, no, you can't do this until you're an adult, or you can't do this because, like, I, the parent, have control over you, I would have cut ties, run away, done everything at 18, gone pretty hard. Now, I transitioned pretty quickly. I got testosterone at 17. 6 months later, got a double mastectomy. So that was a pretty quick transition timeline. But I would have hit it hard. I would have gone to Planned Parenthood. I didn't care. If you tell kids that, if you try and limit them via legislation, not just through parents, but through like state legislation of banning gender affirming care, that's not fixing the problem. It's treating a symptom.
Okay, I think Casey's onto something here where, if we pass laws or if a parent just says you can't transition until you're 18, they'll just leave home and transition hard. I think that's true, but that doesn't mean we should just allow them to transition younger, right? So I think the problem is that there is a lack of relationship that individuals like Casey have with their families at a young age. I don't know anything about her home life, and she doesn't talk about that. But you know, ideally in the home, to have parents who are loving and supporting and who are close in their relationship to their kids can help people as they grow, and maybe they develop gender dysphoria, and their parents and other people in their lives can help them through that. Maybe there's a church community, or maybe not in some cases, but I think the fact that somebody would just go off and do whatever they wanted when they're 18, that really just reveals that they've had a problematic home, more so than we need to stop passing laws or just let people do whatever they want regardless of their age. All right, let's I have one final video, and then we'll wrap up some comments and take some questions.
But there has to be a different way forward that is not explicitly conservative or right wing. And I don't fault anybody for working with conservatives or right wingers. In fact, in the beginning, it might have been necessary to get the message out. However, I don't think it is necessary anymore. I think we are due for a paradigm shift. And I would like to be a part of that. So, however this lands with my audience, however people think, honestly, my audience isn't conservatives anymore. Conservatives are going to watch me either way, whether it's to, say I'm, mutilated and ruined, or that they're praying for me and all that stuff, or, to call me like a left-wing crazy or a sexual deviant. I really don't care at this point. My audience is everybody else, because I am not here to convince people that have already made up their mind that this is wrong. I'm not here to speak to people who are already on board. I'm here to speak to people who are unsure, or who are uninformed and don't know what's going on, or to even people who are firmly against people like me, that are not on the right, that are on the left. I want to open up that dialogue. There has to be another way. It is not us versus them. And I don't want it to be us versus them. And I hope in the next couple of years that we do see that shift.
So, how should the church be defined? Here's John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. So I think she's right. The church should not be defined as right wing or conservative. I think people should identify the church by how we behave as Christians. And I think what I got from her tonight is that she's really, in a sense, given up on Christianity, because she has the perception that we're going to respond badly. Um, I think the challenge that we need to rise up to is we just have to focus on those who are struggling. She's trying to do this her own way in her own strength. And there's an opportunity for us to minister and to role model the grace and the mercy of Jesus, and to meet people where they are. I think it doesn't have to be this way, but I think there is a stereotype of Christianity in the culture. And unfortunately, I think more often than not, we've earned that reputation, but I think it's reversible. I think it's something that we can turn around, that we need to turn around. So I'll leave you with that closing thought. Let's take a couple questions from the chat. All right, Priscilla, Doc, what kind of information do you think parents should have when encountering sons and daughters who want to start these processes? Yeah, great question. So I think the information parents need is simply they need to know that what they're told in the culture and by the medical establishment is not true. I think, a pamphlet, a small booklet, um, something that summarizes key research and basically teaches parents that puberty blockers are not uh, reversible, that there's permanent risk and harm, that this is experimental treatment, that transitioning does not work, that suicide rates and mental health is not better when you follow these people out over time. The side effects of hormones that are often not discussed, the fact that children cannot perform or cannot give consent. There cannot be informed consent when there's an experimental treatment involved because you can't say that you've been informed of risk because we don't know what the risks are. So a lot of these just very basic type of information to let people know not to believe everything that they hear, even from people who are so-called professionals. Um, I'm not aware of well, I'm aware of a couple of resources. I'll post it tonight or some other time soon. I'll give some recommendations, some book recommendations, and some journal recommendations on those kind of resources. But yeah, I think people just need to know basically that the truth is out there and you can find it, and just don't drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak. And we have one other question. Hotaru, is there any possibility, any treatment proposal under study that could do something against the side effects considered permanent? So no, there's not. So puberty blockers, for example, permanently injure bone and affect brain development. That's not reversible. So there's no treatment that you would give. So the treatment would be to stop the puberty blocker. For hormones as well. Um, so if you give a woman testosterone, you increase their risk of cardiovascular problems. So I guess you could say that if somebody was older, you can put them on medications, to control blood pressure and cholesterol and help prevent blood clots and reduce risk of heart attack, focus on healthy living. But you're just chasing effects. The best treatment is just to get people off of the hormones. In terms of like the hair loss, voice loss, no, those are permanent changes, like at the tissue cellular level, that are not reversible. So no, I'm not aware of any studies going on right now to reverse those things, unfortunately. And I think if there was a quick fix, so to speak, for all of the side effects that might encourage people to go down the road of transition, which I think could be detrimental anyway. But good question, though. I appreciate it. And it looks like we have a couple comments. We'll have Casey in our prayers. Absolutely. Sure will. And there are so many other people like her that are coming out now all over YouTube and different platforms. People are starting to talk about these things. Any other comments there? We need to be better Christians. Yes, I totally agree. It's convicting, because, in the past, I don't know how I would have responded if somebody like Casey, came into the church or somebody that I met. I probably would have thought I was being spiritual by, you know, handing out a tract or inviting her to church or, not realizing that that made her feel like I'm trying to fix the weirdo, in her words. But I think I've learned through this experience, just to be there, just make sure that she knows that I love her and that we as Christians love her for who she is, not for what she did or what she does or is doing, but who she is. It's not what we do, it's who we are. That I think is a big shift. Hotaro, totally the church needs to hear this kind of stories. I agree. I think it's tough for churches. Like I'm not a pastor, but I think if I was a pastor, I would be focused on preparing messages and trying to have a good quality sermon, teach the people, edify the people. Um, I think it's a lot to ask of church leadership to really dive deeply into some of these issues. I think there needs to be resources that we provide to pastors and church leaders. Small groups, I think information is really critical. But yeah, I think people are stretched thin. There's a lot going on. So I think intentions are good. I don't think anybody is trying to ignore or neglect any particular group. I think it's just a matter of people don't know. They don't know the research. They don't, they're not going to know the biology or the medicine or some of the science, and how could they? That's not a fair expectation. So I think getting that information to people in different ways through podcasts, through things like this, through maybe some literature, there's lots of stuff out there, and I think it's growing. But yeah, I think it starts with education and awareness. But yeah, we need to hear. We need to make stories like this personal and real. And we need to understand that this is not just, being frustrated towards, the media, something that we see on the news or social media that makes us frustrated about, what the activists are trying to do. You know, um, I think we have to make it really personal with our neighbor and just be a good neighbor. Simple. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody listening in. Thanks for joining, and I look forward to our next time together. Have a good rest of the night. Take care.